Thank you, Chief. So again, introduction, Chief, my name is John Sasuda, and do have some family connection. I was actually born in Boldenville, and my parents taught at New Lima High School, or the school there, when I was born for a number of years. My father was a coach there for a number of years. And then my mom's family is from around here, and related to, so they're Williamses, and my cousin who passed away a few years ago, Marvin Williams, was a local law officer. Was my cousin and his wife and their family, all proud members of the Seminole Nation. So, thank you, and Chief, and I have a slideshow to help kind of talk through this. I'm sure a lot of you guys probably know more of the history of this stuff than I do, but what I want to do is just talk through my view on how this could proceed on several fronts. And I understand you want to go through the two issues, right, Chief? One, we want the land issue, and then the mineral claims issue. Is that correct? Okay, mineral claims, we'll do that one first. Okay, so why don't we, gentlemen, if you could go down to the third slide, I think it is. One more. There we go. Okay. So again, I apologize to anybody, including Chief, I know, who knows this stuff really well, but this is my understanding, very briefly, of the history of the mineral estate for the Seminole Nation here in Oklahoma. As part of the Dawes Act and the 1898 Curtis Act, the allotment that happened through that, there was an equalization fund created for the Seminole Nation, which was to retain 1/2 of all the mineral interests. Of course, this happened with a lot of tribes. The Seminole Nation was not treated fairly. Am I standing in your way? You guys can see over me? I didn't think about that. Okay. I usually speak a little bit better when I'm standing up and waving my arms around, so I appreciate it. So at statehood, Congress abrogated the agreement that you had entered into with the United States, revoking that requirement. Next slide, gentlemen. And so, after a number of years, and for those of you that know, in the 1950s and 60s, Congress established the Indian Claims Commission to hear the multitude of cases that tribes had around the country for treaty abrogation, for takings of land and minerals and other things, etc. And like those other tribes, the Seminole Nation had claims, and this was one of them, was claims for this. And unfortunately, it seems like, again, from my short history of this, that there was initially a finding that the nation was justified in its mineral claim and that it would proceed. And then that was in 1966. But then in 1972, a new claims commission, which means there were new judges that were reviewing the case at that point, reversed that finding and said that the United States did not owe anything to the Seminole Nation for this taking of the mineral estate. So in short, what that means for our purposes today is that you have, unfortunately, a court determination that the United States does not owe you anything for that mineral estate. Now, that's sort of the legal standing of it. That doesn't mean that that's right. It doesn't mean it's just, obviously. But to overturn that, you're going to need legislation. And what that means is, next slide, gentlemen. There's several ways that can play out. But you would need, one is the United States to say, we're going to send this back to court and have sort of basically a new trial and make a determination on that. There is also possible, but I'll be honest with you, a much less likely outcome in which Congress could just pass legislation and say, you know what, that court was wrong, the United States owes you, we're going to pay you for it. Again, that's a possibility, but of all the options that Congress might take, that's probably the least likely. They often don't like to do that, especially if there has been a court decision. So we're looking more likely at having to go back through what's now the Court of Claims, and for them to determine both the liability and the damages provision of that. So the good news is that the damages piece, my understanding, was never actually determined. So that would be, if you get back into the court, that would be an outstanding thing that a new court would be looking at through the lens of today and not through the lens of 1966 or 1972. Next slide, Joel. So again, as I said, to proceed with this, the most likely thing would be through legislation that would grant jurisdiction to the U.S. Court of Claims. Again, they could reinstate the findings of the prior court in 1966 and have them just hear damages amounts. But that is probably of those options. Again, I'm talking like these are options that Congress could consider in looking to pass legislation. Because Congress would be looking at overturning a court decision. So, and just asking for a damages determination. So, more likely than just passing legislation and saying we're wrong and awarding damages money to the tribe, but less likely than the next option we're going to talk about. The good thing about these, is we look forward through the legislative process. One of the issues that always comes up, if you watch anything in the news out of Washington, D.C., they're always worried about spending money, even though they spend a lot of money. And so one of the issues is where money for this judgment would come from. And Congress never likes to take money out of a pot that it's already decided it's going to spend on other things. So if it goes back through the court, one of the things that Congress can do to avoid having to dip into the pots it's already determined is they have a permanent pot of money for court decisions in which the United States is found liable. It's called the Judgment Fund. It's administered by the Department of Justice, but once the United States goes to court and is determined to owe money, most of the time that money is drawn out of this Judgment Fund. And it's in reality the same money that Congress uses to fund other things, but they don't have to account for it in their budget. They just put money into it every year and it sits there until people file cases and get judgments against the United States. But it doesn't appear on their budget and it doesn't cause them the heartburn that they feel whenever they're trying to, as they are now, trying to pass budgets, appropriate money for the next year, etc. Next slide. Thank you. Oh, I must have missed that one. Go back one more. Maybe we skipped one. Okay, no, that was the right one. Go one more. Okay. Here we go. I think we skipped by that one. So the next option that Congress could consider would be to grant jurisdiction, again, to the Court of Claims, but they would only negate the 72 findings and say, we just want a new trial. And to my best guess would be this would be the most likely option that Congress would choose. And so Congress is not saying we're overturning the court and saying we're at fault. They're not asking the court to skip over doing a finding of liability, but they're saying we're going to give it back to the Court of Claims, who hears these claims against the United States now, and say, you figure out whether the mineral estate was wrongly taken, etc. And then if you find that, then you determine how much damages. So it's essentially getting a new trial, a new shot at getting your rights upheld in this mineral estate. And again, I think this would probably be the best, the most likely option that Congress would choose. Again, for simple reasons of which Congress is not making a finding against the United States itself, it's letting the court do it. And also, at the end of the day, if fault is determined and they say they determine an amount of liability, it doesn't come out of Congress's budget. Again, it would come out of this judgment fund, so they don't have to worry about it impacting their other spending. So that's sort of the options, I think, as I see them on the legislative front, is pretty much the only way you can proceed with this. I'll pause there and talk for a couple minutes really fast. Do you have any questions on that process and how that would work? Chief, anybody on the council?
Any questions? Representative Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would be the cost? Is there still making that a cost to file this or requesting that the United States go back to court?
Yes, and if you want, I'll get to that at the end. The cost is mainly me. who do that work for you.
Yes.
If it does go back to court, then, and I can again go this a little bit more later, but that would be going back, that would be something different. That would be hiring a litigation team to go and to litigate that in the court of claims as well.
So at this point in the process, Seminole Nation just has to notify Congress that or the Court of Claims that this is something we are seeking or want them to consider?
Yes. So in short, it's like asking for any other legislation, right? So you're going to go to Congress and say, this is an issue. I want you to pass legislation that will set this up. But you know, the work is in getting prepared for that, because they're not going to just take your word for it, right? You got to sell it to them. So we'll have to do all the research. Most of the research, I'm assuming, is done since it went through this litigation in the Indian Claims Commission years ago. A big chunk of that will already be done. It'll be just getting it together, in a presentable format. And generally, what I find, in working with Congress is you got to tell a story. You got to tell them this was the horrible wrong that was committed. It's never been righted, and you need to fix this. And you need to make them feel bad about it. So the story needs to tell all this to them, so that frankly they feel guilty and they want to do something about it, right? Fix it. So, but that's why. So we have to take all the research that's been done in the past and everything, and get it together, and then make sure it tells a good story. And then you have to have a plan. And I'll get into that in just the next couple of slides. But the Oklahoma congressmen and senators will have to be supportive, right? And then they can help us. We'll do the work in getting support in others from delegations from other states, et cetera. But we'll have to have the Oklahoma delegation on support as well.
So are we at this point here because we didn't have a compliance office in Congress or someone monitoring what needed to happen with these mineral rights?
Not really. So what happened way back when the Indian Claims Commission would make a decision, and they make a decision in the negative like they did, and Congress has nothing else to do, they feel like, right? So, and the purpose of the Indian Claims Commission was essentially to do that for Congress. If you recall your history, in the 1950s, we had what started called the termination era, right? Wanted to get rid of tribes. Part of that termination, where this Indian Claims Commission came from, was there were hundreds, thousands of cases that tribes around the country had filed for, treaty violations, for land takings, all these things that had happened. And Congress said, okay, if we're going to get out of this business, the Indian business, we got to take care of all this stuff. So they set up this special court, Indian Claims Commission, and they heard all of these cases. And the idea was, it'll be just like getting rid of the tribes. We're getting rid of all the cases, right? So, fortunately for us, and I should have mentioned earlier, I'm a member of the Kiowa tribe in western Oklahoma. So we had our own ICC case, back in the 70s, et cetera. Helped put me through college and law school, so there was a good part of that. The whole idea, I should say that the good point was that we didn't go away, right? And a lot of these cases eventually never went away. Some of them, the Indian Claims Commission just never got to. They never finished them. There was just so many of them. Others, and I would say on a positive note, other tribes have been in a similar situation with claims that they had, went to Congress, presented a good story and said, we were wrong. Even though this court went through the process, it was still wrong. The outcome was still wrong. And Congress has said, you're right. And they've taken some action to right that. So this is not something that hasn't happened before. It's never easy, but it does happen. And in fact, I would say every few years there's one of these cases come along. In fact, I know I spent a number of years at the Indian Affairs Committee in the Senate, and we had tribes that had to take several bites at the apple. They came in with sort of a similar case in which Indian Claims Commission case or another court case had an outcome that they didn't like, that wasn't right. And eventually Congress said, you're right, that's not right. we're going to give you some money for it, and we're going to give you some other stuff. And then the tribe will come back a few years later and say, okay, you gave us some, but that's way less than we're owed. And eventually Congress opened up the pocketbook again, gave them some more money, and often they give them some other things, some other lands and stuff, right, and whatnot. So again, it's not unusual, and it's not to say that it's an easy road, but it's not unusual. It happens with some frequency that Congress feels guilty, and they say, okay, you're right, we're gonna try to fix this. Is there another question?
Well, I guess I'm gonna predate myself, but I was here in '66. Sitting right on this same general council, not the same, different people. But I remember when that passed. Once that passed, they wanted to rehear it in 1972. It was a 5-member commission board. Of that 5 members, in 72, one had passed away and replaced it with another person. In 1972, they looked at it and they were looking at how much they were going to have to pay us. They were in the vicinity of $126 million at that time, and it scared them to death. So what they did is they got this new guy on there that wasn't a part of the '66 decision, but a new person, because one had passed, this new person stepped in, and in '72, when he looked at the money, he reversed his decision when they went back into it. So that's where we came to. In the 1980s, if somehow, I'm maybe Lewis will remember this, we hired a raw swimmer and I think a black gentleman by the name of Thompson or something like this. Yeah, we hired them to litigate this case. They went nowhere because Congress told them that they weren't going to do anything because they were going to have to pay them. They were asking for the interest and all. Can you imagine 50 years of interest? What that is? That scared pants off of Congress. And so that's where we're at today. I'm just giving y'all a little background so you'll understand where we come from way back in the day. And so we need to understand that these people that have done this to us, it was a great injustice. They approved it the first time, then changed their mind. And I think that Congress needs to take that into consideration, that we originally won that case. If I want to go back and give me $126 million, I'll take it. I don't need the interest on it. Just give me the $126 million and I'll get out of here. But I do believe they owe us that much interest on it. And I'm not going to say give us prime interest, but they'll figure out something on it. But like I said, I've been around a couple of days, so I do know a little bit of the history of what's going on today. My biggest thing right now, and I'll tell this council, is that I'm getting inundated with calls from people saying that, what's this going to do to my royalties? That those that have royalties now. I am trying to explain to them that this has nothing to do with today's royalties. This has to do with those commissioned up until statehood in 1970. But they're not listening. They want to hear it. Our administration and you as a council, rather than just one person. And right now, I don't know how to answer those people. And if anything is done today, I'm going to be in a quandary to answer that question to those people and our people, period. So I'm going to wait and we'll see what happens here in a little bit. But I just want to bring you a little bit of history of what happened and how we've come to this point. But all of the legwork has already been done. It's archived and everything, and it should be able, nothing else, maybe over Ross Summer's old Hobbs Ross, I think is what the name of the company was out of, or the law firm was out of D.C. that took it. So they should have microfiche or have it on record. So we can pick all that up and put it all into one. So that's not a big problem. But wanted to give you a little bit of history of what's going on and how we come to this point today. That's all I'm going to say at this time. Thank you.
I would believe that the council would agree that in this current time, we wouldn't put any unusual restraints on our tribal members that get somewhat of some small Indian, individual Indian account monies from their minerals that were interested in the profit of the funds that was owed to the Seminole Nation under the original Seminole Agreement, which would come up, and all the research shows that it's up to about the 1990s, I believe, they were with the Department of Commerce, all those numbers of how many barrels of oil came out of here in Seminole country, and that was more like in the late 1990s, the last time we addressed it, because Chief Haney was in office at the time, and Ross Swimmer, and that was Wayne Thompson, Mary Wyrick, I think even Glenn Sharp might have been a part of the local team that was here back in the late 1990s. It got to the point, and all the research is done, actually, so John Tsuda would have a great advantage in this. If you remember, Ross Swimmer was before this council, at the council house, and they couldn't find any of the records. And they said, we can't find the records in D.C., we can't find the records in Fort Worth, but it's like they disappeared off the face of the earth. When Jimmy Factor was the assistant chief of the Seminole Nation, he called my workplace, which many of you know I worked in research and history and as a curator for the museum for a period of years. And he says, I've got a load of boxes up here, and they're about 7.5 foot tall and about 8 to 9 foot wide. They're taking up my wall. And he says, if you can come up here and identify these, I'd appreciate it, because they're going to end up somewhere if you don't identify them. So I walked in Jimmy Factor's office, the office of the assistant chief back then, and I seen the names on that boxes. You know what they were, Wayne? Roy St. Louis. Only Wayne, probably on this council, recognizes that name. That's the original Court of Claims attorney before Paul Nebel. Paul Nebel became our Court of Claims attorney. As soon as I saw those names on that box, on those boxes, I knew what they were immediately. I said, those are the records of Paul Nebel, Court of Claims. So we have access to those records. A lot of them was digitized when Ross was here. It got all the way to a bill being presented to the council. There was a bill, a draft bill, and Wes Watkins was going to be actually presented. So all that information is already gathered, and just to take it to the next step and get us over the hump on this. I think we owe it to our ancestors because they believed in it. Just because there may be some on this council now that does not understand it, have no idea what it's speaking about, there are some of you that remember when it was important. It was an important item to us as Seminole people. It still should be. And I think at this day and time, if we are going to pursue it and actually obtain it, this is the time to knock on that and try to get it. But that's up to this council, and I appreciate Mr. Tsuda, because I think Mr. Tsuda and his constituency gives us the best chance at this day and time to actually get that settlement. Representative Borba.
Will be looking at the mineral plan, or is he going to be doing anything with our land? Because I feel like the Seminoles, that's a really good, because they like sad stories. The Seminoles lost a lot of land, and because of the federal government and
One subject at a time. Now we're on mineral claims, and he does have some clips for that other.
well, I think they kind of coincide. You know what he said, like they like sad stories, and that's a sad
They
story.
actually,
And Mr. Tsuda, I think your dad was my high school basketball coach. Sister
I'll
Joanna.
just use this
Sister
mic.
Donna, yep, that's my oldest sister.
But anyway, there are two totally different subject matters, Representative Borba. Mineral claims is totally different from what we would call initial historical lands, or what we sometimes call in 25 CFR 151, Part 151 as former reservation. So they are different. So let's finish up with the mineral claims here, and then he'll go on to the next issue.
Thanks, Chief.
Representative Cootie?
Is it my understanding that this whole claims would depend on the Congress giving the okay to go ahead with this, to start over?
Yes.
So it actually would have lays in Congress's hand. Regardless, no matter how much information we've got, it doesn't matter.
It's because you have a final determination from the Indian Claims Commission. No liability on the United States part. I would, it's worth a conversation. I would have a conversation with folks at the Department of Interior, particularly the Solicitor's Office, and see if they think there's any way that we could proceed without having actual legislation. But at least to my mind, at this point, I don't think there's any other route. I would have that conversation just to make sure that there's not another route. But
But it still is in Congress's hand.
that's my belief.
Several years ago now, it's probably in, Mr. Suda, you might remember this, with the Choctaw and the Chickasaw received about $150 million timberland settlement, and it seemed like the rich got richer. But might be watching this film. And that was true, they did get a settlement just about, 6 years ago? It might have been around 6 years ago. And they went through the route that they needed to go through to get it. And if we're going to do it ever as Seminoles, this is the time to do it. We may not have another chance to see if we can actually get that settled.
Can I, real quick, too, Chief, address the councilman's question about individual member royalties? Pardon me. Assuming you're talking about Seminole members and their royalties they get, right? Get a little bit ahead of ourselves, but if we get to the point where there's discussion about a legislative settlement, then there will be discussions also with the Department of Interior and the Department of Justice, because Congress will want them to weigh in as well. And at that point, you, the nation, can negotiate as part of the settlement a way to hold your members harmless, right? So the royalties that they have would not be impacted if that's what you want, right? If it would be by the settlement, but you can carve that out if you would like as part of your settlement. You'll have that flexibility when that time comes to make sure that they're taken care of. Does that make sense?
In other words, this council, if we was to receive a settlement, could actually determine that what they're receiving presently, we would not be involved in trying to collect half of that royalty. If we so choose, and I would advise very strongly, but that's the direction that the council would go. You look at this. Who is it? Raise your hand. Representative Sampson.
Okay. Now, when you say members, to me, that excludes the freedmen. We had allotment as well, and damages as well. Now, is this going to be a whole or a division again? Does that mean the freedmen have to come up with their own attorneys, or what?
Now, some of you, as you understand it, correct me if I'm wrong in this interpretation, that when it comes to the minerals, that actually includes all citizens of the Seminole Nation. And also, because the freedmen receive allotment properties as well as the Seminoles. That's Wayne, I saw your expression on your face. If you understand it any differently, you can speak now.
Can I, because one
You
point.
can, yes.
Again, get a little ahead of ourselves, but if we got to that point where, we're talking settlement and legislation that would, that will have, again, interjection by the U.S. Department of Justice and Department of Interior. And they, I almost assure you, they will want to make sure that individual landowners, including the lot holders, don't have their rights negatively impacted. In every settlement, water settlements, land settlements, everything that I've ever seen or been part of, they always take care to make sure that the individual lot holders' rights are protected as part of a settlement. That's the position of the Department of Justice usually. So.
Because one thing I remember, I'm not totally that old, but I'm old enough to remember 72. When my grandfather came home from sitting on this council saying, we're getting ready to get our money for what they done to all of us. And at that time, they did not call us freedmen. We were called Seminoles. So therefore, it is a big thing for us to know that we're all equal in this. That being said, Chief, you might need to have a meeting.
Not to get into any kind of debate or anything, but the term freedman is represented in the 1866 Treaty of Article 3. That's the only place that the term freedman even is mentioned. And other references, it uses the term persons of African descent. So I think citizens covers everybody. A Seminole by blood is a citizen. A Seminole freedman is a citizen. So, that would be determined. I believe that, does anyone really realize that what we call the judgment fund today, that was the Florida Lands Claim Settlement. It comes out of the same court of claims when we went after it. And that was determined, those judgment funds, by how the Seminoles were recognized by the United States as of 1823. And that 200th anniversary is coming out September the 18th of this year, actually, the Treaty of Fort Moultrie Creek. And that's our judgment fund law. So, has to say you have to be a part of, as the United States recognized the Seminoles as of 1823. So that's all throughout our code of law pertaining to the judgment fund. And that's pertaining to a judgment. And minerals is somewhat different. Because minerals took place after 1823. Minerals took place after the so-called Reconstruction Treaties of 1866 as well. So, I would strongly recommend to the tribal council to think in a matter in a way that recognizes the opportunities that we have as a nation. We actually, the real thing that happened, Wayne, if you remember right, is we were fixing to have a referendum in 2000. And the Interior came and said, why don't y'all go ahead and get this settlement? It's most likely it can happen. They even identified the source. It was the petroleum reserves. The petroleum reserves where we were going to get this money from. But if anyone remembers right, we had a referendum in 2000, didn't we? And we went ahead, referendum, and there was 9 different items, and we were challenged on that by the Department of Interior. And the rest is history. Bang, good, I lived through that. I don't know if anyone else was on the council back at that time. But my lands, we appeared in court in Washington, D.C. over that. So there are decisions that the council has to make. There are said right here on this council, right now, has no iota. About the Florida Lands Claims, in Judgment Fund, settlement, or the railroad settlement, or even the minerals. So You know, the thing it is, if people before you believe that the Seminoles had the right to get it, who are we to question them? Who are we to question our elders before us? I mean, Wayne remembers it back to '66. I was 2 years old. Any other questions for Mr. Tsuda on this subject matter?
Well, just, oh, sorry.
Currently, I have a question, and maybe I'm a little ahead of myself in reference to this. On this bill that we want to use, you're representing TR 98-113, TR 2015-72. We didn't get any information on what the outcome of these were, except on 98-113. To me, it seems like it's just a lost cause, maybe. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I mean, for what I've read, as far as this original Seminole Act and everything, it just doesn't, the wording is correct. Our own council back then in 1897 accepted it. Curtis Act came into effect for 13, 15 years. I don't understand, and maybe you can tell me where this says that the nation is owed half. I understand what this says over here, the original Curtis, the original Seminole Act. But what I'm reading is when those lands were allotted, who knew where oil was going to be at that time? We didn't know that. So, I mean, can you explain that to me? Why it's using these other bills to get this resolution passed?
And I don't know if I'm standing in a bad zone for a reception, but this mic keeps coming and going. I'll speak to that just a little. We just had a case that one with a cord might be illuminating energy that puts down batteries. This one, I'm not kidding, I'm a walking energy source. Wow. And anyway, I'm going to hold this like this. Maybe there's something going on here, and magnetic wise. We always stood, Wayne, you know this, and some of you that know a little bit about our history. We have always stood, Seminole Indians, that the Curtis Act didn't apply to us. Why did we stand there? Because of the original Seminole Agreement. That's why. We did that before the Curtis Act came. So therefore, we have always stood that the Curtis Act did not affect us. Hooper versus the city of Tulsa just came down about a month ago. And Stead's about to have a fit over that thing because just as I appeared in municipal court about 2.5 to 3 weeks ago because I wanted to see what municipal court was doing to our tribal members. They didn't have the right to prosecute within the exterior boundaries of the reservation, so I wanted to see how they were conducting themselves. And sure enough, David, you were there. They were going up. They didn't know what to do, really, in all acceptance, but I stood and said, and I shared with her, I didn't know what the judge was going to do. He could have called me down and said, sit down, but he didn't. I said, I'm the chief of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. I'm the current president of the Intertribal Council of the 5 civilized tribes. You know what his next move was? Young lady, do you have a tribal card? Is that true? Young lady, do you have a tribal card? To that Seminole Indian stand up son. And her mama had went to get a card in the car. You remember that? And she come in like she done won the lottery. She was waving that tribal card like that. And change the venue, just like that. Just like that. I will say this. Sometimes in the providence of the Creator and the sovereignty of God, people are placed. You're where you're supposed to be right now, at this moment. I'm where I'm supposed to be at this moment. One day, I won't stand here any longer. But for right now, in this moment, I must, with you as the governing body of the Seminole Nation, try to pursue what's right by our people. And I know you believe that down there in your home as well. I know you believe that. And if it was good enough for our elders to believe and claim to, that the Curtis Act never applied to us, and now we have a federal court case in the 10th Circuit that says that, and I know they're going to try to take it to the Supreme Court. This may not be a losing cause. We might actually get the settlement. Is there a guarantee? No. But there is possibility that it can be done? I believe so.
Any other questions for Mr. Tsuda?
Yes, sir, I don't get the floor. I appreciate that, though. I understand you said, we didn't fall under the Curtis Act, and if that's true, in 1922, this Alice Brown Davis was appointed, not elected, marching. Am I correct? So did we, do we, or do we not? According to the Curtis Act.
I think the city of Tulsa versus Hooper says no.
I understand that.
Isn't that what that said?
No.
Yeah, that's exactly what it said. We did not fall under the Curtis Act. Not only the Seminoles, but the Curtis Act provision of Arkansas law did not continue after Oklahoma statehood, okay? Now, really, that was the finding there by the 10th Circuit, that Arkansas law, which the Curtis Acts had stated we're going to be under in the Indian Territory, no longer exists. We're in Oklahoma now, and that's something the state official, especially at the highest levels with the governor, could not understand until the 10th Circuit decision. As far as I'm concerned, it was just a confirmation of what our elders said, that we didn't come under the Curtis Act, and that was a fruition of it right then.
I would just suggest that additionally, the fact that you had a preliminary positive finding of a taint on behalf of the United States in 1966 that was then reversed later, says that there's grounds that, yeah, that provision survived, that, you know, this equalization fund of the mineral estate survived. So I think, you know, it's, again, it's never certain when you're asking Uncle Sam to reach into his pocket and, you know, give you some money that he didn't think he had to give you earlier. But I think you've got grounds to go forward, and again, part of it is telling the story that decision was wrong, and you know that's how you get to where you want to go.
I understand that, but 2 years later, it was appealed. It was, am I wrong? Am I correct? Was it or was it not vacated?
I don't know. I don't know the procedural history. I'm assuming that there was an appeal, and that appeal was turned down. It was very common. There were very few appeals of decisions of the ICC that were overturned.
It's sunsetted. They call it sunsetting. When the Court of Claims Commission came back, then they sunsetted. So any claim after the sunset period, you got to bring it like this. just as we're proposing. And many other administrations before us have proposed it. Even the last administration, to some extent, was hoping to go after the mineral claims.
Question of the AG.
Is there a question?
Yeah.
Representative Markham?
Sure. Currently, now I call upon this question because I met every member of our congressional contingency have been dismissed, but one of our offices that are congressional entities will agree with our stand.
So,
What are the odds?
what are the
that they
odds?
will agree with us?
You never know. I'll be honest with you. Legislation is always hard to get passed. And maybe, if you can go to the next slide, I'll go through real quick. So who makes these decisions may partly answer your question, right? So there's basically 4 committees that this bill would go through in the Congress. The Judiciary Committee, because you're talking about resetting the clock on a judicial decision. And then the Natural Resources Committee in the House, which handles majority of Indian Affairs issues, tribal issues. And then on the Senate side, same thing, the Judiciary Committee, because it's a judicial issue. And then the Indian Affairs Committee will hear it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Justice and the Department of Interior will also weigh in to give views from the United States administration. Next slide, please. Why don't you go ahead and roll through. These are just the current chairs of those committees. Next. Next. Here we go. And so we're talking about the Oklahoma delegation. As I mentioned, it'll be to have all, if not, or most of the delegation. I will say certainly the 2 senators. You almost always have to have both senators from your home state to support whatever legislation you're pursuing. And then in the House, I don't know. Jock Grichin, who's a new member in the 2nd District, is a bit of an unknown. And so I don't know where he would be on this issue. The others, generally speaking, I've always found them to be pretty supportive of tribal issues, particularly when you can present, as I said, a good story, right? If this was wrong, you can point to how it was wrong and say this is something that you can make right. So I think, you got a fair shot at getting them on board with the idea of pursuing this legislation. Again, we would talk to which member probably want a bill entered into both the House and the Senate side. Usually we introduce companion bills. And so I have a great relationship with Senator Langford's staff. I've known them since he was a House member before he became senator. I also have a great relationship with Senator Mullen. Actually kind of personal. I interact with him personally a lot of times. And so I think that there will be support, at least to explore whether a bill can get passed from those 2. I've always found Senator Langford to be very interested in justice issues, doing right by them. And then Senator Mullen is a member of the Cherokee Nation and has generally been very supportive of tribal issues. And again, I think somebody who sees the world in right and wrong, and we tell a good story, and that this is the right thing to do, and I think he'll be supportive of that. In the House, of course, Tom Cole, as a member of the Chickasaw Nation, is almost always supportive of tribal issues, and I have no reason to believe he wouldn't be very supportive of this. I've also known Tom a long time and have a good personal relationship with him, and can have a good, honest conversation with him. The other advantage of knowing Tom well and having him on your side is he's a great strategist. He can tell you how to get legislation through the House, through committees. He's also currently the chair of the Rules Committee in the House, which is the one is the committee which determines which rules actually go, or which bills actually go to the floor. So I think that Stephanie Weiss I've found to be very supportive. Tribal issues, she's pretty new, but to date I think she's been supportive. And Frank Lucas has been our congressman out on the west side for a long time. And again, I think he's always been, one, he's been willing to listen to Tom Cole, which is very helpful. But two, again, somebody who, if you present him the picture that this was a wrong and this is a chance to make it right, I've always found him to be supportive of that as well. So Kevin Hurd, I think, is probably willing to go along with the others. I've found his focus, really would not be on tribal issues, but on other issues. And but for tribal issues, then he just frankly turns, to Tom Cole or the others, Frank Lucas, and says, "What do you guys think?" And if they say, "The way to go," he goes that way. Again, Mr. Brecheen, the new member of the House delegation, is just sort of the wild card. But I mean, if we didn't get him, but we got the other four, we'd be in good standing.
I think you would be. We have a relationship with Josh Burkini and Stephanie Weiss. They're both former state senators, and they served with me in the Senate.
That would be great.
So we have access to being able to, and both of them have been supportive of tribal issues in the past. It's just a matter of sharing with them, and they all lean to Tom Cole. So we have access to all of those members.
That's helpful. That's great.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, in particular, this issue in particular, is to my mind more clean cut in a right and wrong sort of thing, right? If we can tell the story, this was not handled properly by the court, that the outcome was not right, then it becomes a cleaner issue for Congress to deal with. When you have other issues that impact gaming rights and other things, and other tribes are opposed and whatnot, it becomes very difficult for Congress to work their way through those different interests. But in this case, it's really pretty clear. It's your nation's interest in this historic mineral estate, and was it wrongly taken? We convince them so. Then it's just a matter of getting them to open up the checkbook and write a check for it. So, that's largely the process as I see it, working through the Congress to get there. And again, we'll have interaction sooner or later with the Department of Justice and the Department of Interior. Hopefully earlier, particularly with Interior, to the extent that we have any gaps in research or gaps in the history piece. I have generally found the Interior folks are pretty helpful in saying, well, we have this document and this kind of contradicts the documents that you have, but it's good to get that stuff from them, right? So you know what's going on. So I found them to be generally helpful, and the earlier we can get them engaged in this would be helpful, I think, as well. At the end of the day, Congress is going to turn to both the Department of Justice and to the Department of Interior and ask what they think about this issue. And if we can, again, say, in some ways it's the same thing, tell them a story. Done wrong, you can fix this, right? And if we have the two agencies saying, well, we do think that this would be a good outcome to fix this wrong, then that would be helpful, very helpful as well to the overall effort.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Representative Lambert?
I was basically saying that she was as well. Josh Burkini is a friend of mine, but he was a member of Tom Colburn's cabinet, and he cut his political teeth in Seminole County as his bill rep here. He's very fiscally conservative, so if you focus on not coming out of the current budget, I think that's a big, that'll be a big winning point for him. And he is also willing to follow Tom Cole as well. I agree with her on that. And so, I think if we're going to do it, now's the time, because like you said, we have all these people on that are pretty much, but if we wait too long, we're going to get a lot of this
Things will be changing.
there, and we're going to miss our opportunity.
I spoke to Representative Tom Cole, and his take on it is, I'll be glad to assist the Seminole Nation. So, you know, what that means, is anybody's guess, but I think he's gonna be fair with us.
And it's for
Keen. I met, so I was actually really good friends with Senator Coburn and his staff. They were some of my best friends when I worked on the Hill. And so I was talking with one of them last year, who's been chief of staff, and I didn't realize today he said that Mr. Burkeen he grew up with him. They went to high school together or something. So, but he said he spoke very highly of him. So I just don't know that much about him in his positions. What publicly has happened is he has been sort of fighting with the Republican leadership in the House and carving out. But oftentimes, Tom Coburn did this, right? If you're smart, you can carve a space out for yourself where you're not exactly following the herd, but you still get your voice heard. And I suspect, that he's trying to, or in some part, trying to follow Coburn's steps the way he did that, because he became very effective at that.
Representative Stephanie Bice has been very supportive of the Seminole Nation and other areas. I know when we received that $6.5 million, close to $6.5 million just about a month ago. She was very instrumental in pushing that on behalf of the Seminole Nation for transportation.
So that's part of, I appreciate that, and I certainly will lean on you guys. That's also part of what I do. I develop a strategy or plan, who to talk to as we're going through, and obviously we'll have to spread it out from the Oklahoma delegation. But that's, in some ways, that's the normal course of what people like me do in DC.
Mr. Suda, did you have some other clips on another subject matter?
Yeah, we'll get to the lens.
Yeah, might as well just
So
touch
if
on
you
that,
can-
and we'll go forth with the tribal resolutions for us.
Okay. All right, so if you can roll back up to the second, should be the, there we go. I think that's the first actual slide, right? Yeah, okay. Question about extents of former reservations and how that may impact the ability to do gaming on those. And so I just threw up here, here's sort of two of the relevant pieces of law. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which has some pretty strict land provisions in it. And in general, the idea is that tribes can't put gaming facilities on lands that they acquired after 1988 when the legislation was passed. But as with all legislation, there are some exceptions. And so there's what's called the Oklahoma exception. And this basically I have up here, so if the tribe had no reservation in 1988, and recent Supreme Court cases may now throw this language in some flux, just to be aware, but in 1988, nobody thought there were any reservations left in Oklahoma, right? And so if those lands are located in Oklahoma, where there's no reservations, but they're within the bounds of the tribe's former reservation, as defined by the Secretary of Interior, then those lands would also be eligible for gaming. What is it defined by the Secretary? Well, that's what this regulatory provision says. Former reservation in Oklahoma means within the exterior boundaries of the last reservation that was established by treaty, executive order, or secretarial order. So there's sort of a descending list here. And that is something that we'll have to get into and look through the history. As with virtually every tribe around the country, but particularly in Oklahoma, and you guys know this, we all started out with larger reservations and they got shrunk down, and we entered into subsequent treaties that shrunk them down. We had the president signing executive orders that shrunk them down, and you would think that that wouldn't have the power of law, but the Supreme Court 150 years ago said, no, that does. The president could just do this by himself. That's what an executive order is. And so by executive order, the president has shrunk down reservations as well. And then it's a little bit interesting. I'm not the lawyer to do it, but some enterprising lawyer someday may want to challenge this provision of the regulations because the secretarial order really shouldn't carry that much power. But at least in the regulation as it stands now, it does. And so, what this will entail in part is going through part of the history, and part of this, I'm assuming, is in the ICC boxes as well, because you got to know what lands were part of the mineral estate over different years to determine whatever that might be as well. So, and in there will certainly be treaty provisions, probably an executive order at some point. The real question will be, where those apply, where that is, and if there is a secretarial order, I would be a little surprised, but maybe there is. But we'll have to identify those and just see where those lines on the map play out. Next slide. So, how do you go about this? So the process is actually pretty simple. If you want to open a gaming facility on any other newly acquired land, and you're not sure, and sometimes you want to say you're not sure and you want to tell the government to tell you, right? So that if they're thinking that it's further out than you thought it was, then that's even better for you, right? So you submit a request and ask, is this land within this acceptable area, in this former reservation area? The person that starts that process is named Paula Hart. She's the director of the Office of Indian Gaming. The Office of Indian Gaming is in the office of the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior. And Paula's a long time, so she's actually worked in that office almost since it was started a few years after IGRA was enacted. And she became the director about 15 years ago now, I think. So she's pretty experienced at these things. Been around a long time, seen a lot of issues. And I would say, so Paula worked for me when I was in the Assistant Secretary's office. And I would say she's very pro-tribal, and she'll usually try to do whatever she can to at least start out saying she supports you. Now, she runs into internal roadblocks, either from the lawyers, the solicitor's office, or other things. And this, where she starts out, usually gets massaged a little bit and doesn't end up where she originally thought it would. But that's where it'll start. What we'll need to do again is to kind of get together everything that we can find, written decisions about the Seminole Nation, reservation, and anything to do with its boundaries. And that includes DOI decisions after 1906, and again, any ICC, any of the cases, the files in the ICC claims will probably have a lot of relevant information for that as well. That's about it. Like I said, it's on the surface, a relatively simple process. It's a very political process. At the Department of Interior, it's obviously a heavy responsibility because, as you know, gaming is a very politically fraught issue. Some people support it, some people don't. Tribes fight with each other over it, so these questions about boundaries and where casinos can be placed sometimes impact other tribes. And in Oklahoma, there's a lot of us tribes in one state, so a lot of people eventually start weighing in as these decisions make their way through the Office of Indian Gaming and then through the Office of the Assistant Secretary. And then not just tribes, but you have counties, local governments that will contact the Secretary's office. You'll have governors, obviously, who contact the Secretary's office, and usually feel free to contact the White House, who will call over and say, hey, what's going on with this? So there's a lot of interaction. It may look like the surface is kind of still, but underneath there will be lots of activity that goes on with these decisions. So that's about it.